Hey everyone, so One Piece chapter 1121 just came out, and this is gonna go down as one of the greatest chapters in One Piece history. It reminded me of Doflamingo's big speech from chapter 801, where he kind of framed the general final conflict and the throne wars that were gonna take place and the various factions involved. But this chapter was much more pointed about it and really took its time cutting across the world as literally every one of the factions tunes in to hear Vegapunk's speech as he spells out what the final conflict is going to be about and what everyone is going to be fighting for. This chapter was essentially a much more elaborate, in-depth, and dramatic version of the speech from 801, simply because we've hit a different point in the story. Whereas Doflamingo's speech felt more as though it was foretelling what was to come soon, this speech feels more like the kickoff moment, which makes sense because if you step back and look at the broader story narratively in terms of structure, well, the beginning parts of the New World really were about this conflict with Kaido, right? Building up to defeating Kaido, and really Kaido and Big Mom were both of them going down by the end of this Versus 4 Yonko saga. And Doflamingo's own storyline with Punk Hazard and Dressrosa was a lead into that. So after those two went down, that was kind of the final domino before things sort of open up, and it suddenly becomes an all players involved sort of game where everybody is making their move. I guess ironically, while Kaido wanted to be the one to start the greatest war the world has ever seen, the greatest war the world has ever seen basically kicked off post his defeat. It's also symbolized to me in a way in the sense that Wano was emphasized so much as being this isolationist state. Wano was cut off from the outside world. While Wano was going on, things were sort of starting to develop in the outside world with the events of the Reverie and so on, but we were not meant to be privy to any of that. Oda really wanted to keep the story really focused on just the events of Wano against Kaido and Big Mom, and that made Wano kind of the final sort of isolated, island-based conflict that we're really gonna get, where we're not really merging the micro and macro story together. As soon as Wano ended, now it's just open season where basically, the Egghead Island conflict has been going on, but it feels like this arc has sort of been a global conflict. We're getting the Straw Hats versus the Gorosei and the Marines, but at the same time, the ripple effects of what's happening here is in real time, resonating throughout the entire world, and throughout this arc we've been cutting away so frequently to outside conflicts that are taking place as the world war really gets rolling, right? Like Shanks versus the Kid Pirates, we had Garp versus the Blackbeard Pirates at Hachinosu, we had Sabo and the Revolutionaries battling it out with the Celestial Dragons at Reverie. So this speech feels like a long time coming in terms of Oda really framing us for the start of the final war, because we knew that Oda basically announced that, hey, the final saga is officially beginning, right? So Egghead was always meant to get the ball rolling. This is the moment that feels like, the snowball has been kicked down the hill. Everything is just gonna ramp and ramp and ramp, and we're gonna get more and more action from here as things are just gonna get crazier and crazier. So this moment coming at the climax of the Egghead Island arc, it just shows perfect understanding from Oda in terms of what the reader really wants to feel and how we really want to be hyped up for the events of this upcoming final saga. And it's almost like a promise from the author that, hey, this is the story that I built, this is the stuff that you guys are excited for, I promise I'm going to deliver, because I know this. Like, I've been working on all of this for a reason. I've been setting up all these pieces bit by bit by bit, so that now we can kick it off and make all the pieces basically fight like you all have wanted for so long. So, extraordinarily happy for this chapter, not just because it felt cool to see all of these characters we're cutting throughout the world, but really because it feels as though it's just a direct, clear vision for what the rest of the story is going to be, and it's exactly how we hoped it would be, which is going to be this big final war. And I like Oda even painting out, the final panel that a lot of people are breaking down, the big spread of all the major players, it seems like, in the final war. I wouldn't read that much into it in the sense that, it's not a strength-based thing. It's also not just like these are the most important characters of the story. No matter what's happening, the most important characters of the story are the Straw Hat Pirates, right? These characters that are set up, I think that Oda may have selected them in some ways as to hint that these are all going to be very crucial for major worldwide plot events going forward. I mean, several of them are obviously Yonko. Then we've got Dragon, head of the Revolutionaries, Akainu, head of the Marines, Imu, of course, the big bad at the end of all things. And then we've got Sabo, who's sort of the new face of the Revolutionaries that's up and coming in the next generation, and then Kobe, who on the flip side is sort of the new hero of the Marines up and coming on that side of things as the face of this generation for the Marines. So we've got that stuff going. I feel like Aokiji is almost the odd man out here in that he's his own independent faction. He's not really bound to anyone. He's technically part of the Blackbeard Pirates, but he really does seem like his own thing. And to me, that's just a big sign that, hey, maybe Aokiji, whatever storyline Oda has planned for him, is going to be really pivotal in shaping the world one way or another, even if he himself is not leading some big group in any sort of way. And then finally, we've got the big question mark, the silhouetted character, Shanks' evil twin. And I say that in quotes, but look, at this point, it's not that crazy of an idea. It's just not. If honestly, we're at a point where if you'd asked me a little bit ago, I would have said it's insane. But sometimes in One Piece, it's just a few things need to line up together, and it's just like, no, never mind. I could very easily see Oda going this route. I mean, an evil twin, I know people are saying evil twin, it doesn't have to be a twin, it could just be Shanks' brother. I don't know why the idea of, I think, for some reason, evil twin is just what people jump to. It could just be Shanks' older brother, younger brother, something like that. I also think that evil twin is more of an idea that's made fun of in fiction in general, as kind of being sort of lowbrow writing. But I'll just say this, I said the same thing in the stream, Oda's not above that. Listen, this is a man who's used amnesia as a major pivotal story point. Twice. I don't actually think that Oda is necessarily above doing evil twin stuff, and I think that the writing could actually be good if you just look past the cliche trope of the evil twin idea, right? I think the writing could be good. Again, it doesn't have to be a twin, it could just be an older brother, younger brother, or something like that. Oda's already established, based on Shanks' father, who we got to see in his prime, that the Figarlands look remarkably similar, right? Shanks looks identical to his dad, and his dad and him, it seemed like they wielded similar swords to some degree. I could easily see Oda just writing a brother for Shanks. There is stuff that could work out of that would be, I think, actually good writing. So, as ridiculous as it sounds, yes, the evil twin stuff is on the board, and I actually have a decent amount of evidence that I would put into a video potentially down the line, maybe even in the next couple weeks, that I think I could put out regarding why I think the evil twin idea actually has a lot more merit than it initially seemed. And keep in mind, this is coming from me, who for a long time thought that made no sense and that it's just obviously Shanks talking to the Gorosei. On the flip side, it could be the man with the burn mark, which I think is something that a lot of people are writing on, and I think that's a very decent possibility as well, simply because the man with the burn mark is the last sort of major mysterious figure that's been name dropped into the story lately in the last 100 or so chapters, who we have yet to meet and yet to get any real idea about. I've seen lots of interesting theories that the former member of Joy Boy's crew, that it is some holy knight but not Shanks' evil twin, that it's a character that's waiting at Laugh Tale for people to show up. I'm interested. I don't know who this character is, how they fit into the full story, but I do think that the man with the burn mark being the silhouetted figure, that's a great possibility as well. But honestly, at this point, I'm just between the two. Either it's someone related to Shanks, a brother, a twin, whatever, or it's the man with the burn scar. And honestly, if I had to put my money on it right now, I would lean towards twin. That's where I would go with, but even if that sounds crazy, just wait for the video that I will likely have out in a couple weeks of why I think it's maybe not that crazy. Again, I'm not saying I'm sold on it, but there are a few things that just came together with this, even just this little silhouette, that suggests that, okay, Oda might actually be going down that route, and the signs might have been in sight for some time now. But finally, I want to talk a bit about the Bonnie moment, and in that regard, we have a really great comment from the Voice of the People, which is my top tier of patrons. So Sunny Clip says, such a great moment with Bonnie and Luffy. I love that Luffy makes those he's saving often take part in it also. Luffy encouraging her to take action, but not making the moment about himself, but propping her up. The final named attack isn't Bonnie and Luffy's or some combination, it's just Bonnie's, and there's something beautiful about that. I'm happy that a lot of people really enjoyed this moment, and I'm happy that a lot of people are starting to embrace the idea of, Bonnie joining the crew. I remember that was controversial when I started talking about that a while ago. A lot of people embracing the idea of Bonnie being Luffy's successor and not the next Nika, but, a mini Nika in a sense, which is, again, something that was controversial when I first put it out. I'm happy that people are really enjoying that. And like you said, it is a new sort of phase of Luffy's journey where he's sort of being the big brother figure in a lot of ways, right? Like Luffy growing up, he was the little brother figure to Ace and Sabo. Luffy at this point in the story, he's sort of the big brother figure because we saw this very same scenario in Wano, just one arc back with Momonosuke, where in a very, very, very similar moment, Momonosuke and Luffy reach the rooftop and face off Kaido. Kaido, who's been the tormentor for Momonosuke, who caused so much pain to Momonosuke's father, father, much like Saturn caused so much pain to Bonnie's parents. And Luffy's encouraging Momonosuke that you should fight Kaido, bite him, fight him, do something, and Momonosuke steps up and does it. This is a very, very, very similar moment with Luffy encouraging Bonnie that, hey, this is your moment, you need to do this to Saturn. I like that new sort of role for Luffy and his sort of him being a bit more of a guiding mentor at this point, now that Luffy himself has really come into his own and is basically a Yonko, Pirate King material individual at this point. So I enjoy that. I personally didn't feel emotionally that much for the Bonnie moment, just because in comparison, I felt a lot more for the Kuma moment when Kuma punched Saturn, because the simple difference is that we spent so much time with Kuma and his story and just generally his backstory, such that I felt a lot of his pain and his suffering and everything that he'd been through when he finally punched Kuma, and why that was such a long time coming, because we just spent so much time with his story, whereas with Bonnie, her backstory at that point was half a chapter. A lot of the things that she talks about this chapter are things that I feel like could have been fleshed out more over the course of this arc, and I still really feel like we could have just spent a bit more time with Bonnie. A lot of the things that she's talking about here, about how she felt so lonely, that is something that, you know, it's softly touched on, I suppose, and it's like she cries a lot, she says she misses her father, but it's not something that I truly feel was developed in depth before this moment, the same way that you see with a lot of other Straw Hats and their core character need their core character conflict before they get their big moments in their arcs. So Bonnie saying, I was so lonely, her thoughts about whether or not there's a real God, I feel like these things were underdeveloped before this moment, right? Whereas it could have been a lot more powerful if we just spent a little bit more time on Bonnie, inside her mind, inside her story, even just one or two more chapters attached to her experiences and her backstory, really post her losing her crew at the big moment that we saw at the end of pre-time skip with her being captured by Akainu seemingly, right? And her losing her crew after that incident. I think really getting to experience that harrowing 2 years, even in montage format for like half a chapter or so, that would have been very, very powerful, and just getting some of Bonnie's inner thoughts, like the loneliness that she's experiencing, her longing for a real God, all of that. I think that would have been really, really gone a long way, at least for me personally, to emotionally resonate more with her moment right here. I think it's definitely good on paper, and I can understand why several people like it. For me, it's more net neutral. That, for me, was not the highlight of the chapter. For me, the highlight of the chapter was the things that we got towards the end. And Bonnie's moment kind of checks off a nice box, like, okay, this was a character moment that is good for her. It's just that some character moments are going to hit you differently depending on how emotionally invested you already feel in that character's storyline. For me, I don't think I was quite there enough with Bonnie just yet to really feel as much as I did with like Kuma punching Saturn. So that's where I'm at with it, but totally understandable if other people feel differently. But beyond that, I love the chapter as a whole. I am more excited than ever for the final saga of One Piece to really kick off. And with that, I will talk to you all next week.